Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are tuning from. Welcome to River of Living Water Revival School. This is River of Living Water Revival School, bringing to you this day the topic of why supernatural influence. Why supernatural influence? God and families. God and families. People all over the world and families all over the world will express the fact that families experience incredible spiritual dynamics. Incredible spiritual dynamics. We know, for example, that where society in Africa are defined into tribes, where societies in Africa are defined into tribes, we know that every tribe has got its own spiritual system. They started with their own spiritual system. And this spiritual system is a system that was designed, that was enacted, which ordered and ruled every family. It ruled every family. And these families grew into societies which are called tribes. And there is a lot of spiritual governments. All tribes within Africa had spiritual government which ordered them so that they may know how to deal with the situations and to handle very many critical processes. And so we also realize that when we go back to the Word of God, that even before God established the family of Abraham, even before God established the family of Abraham, the seed of Abraham, his selected seed, he first of all enacted a blood covenant. He entered into a blood covenant between Abraham and himself. It's a blood covenant in which Abraham agreed to give God his seed, to give God his choice seed, so that he can use that seed to create a nation of Israel. And so we may see that the nation of Israel also is a people of a covenant. They are a people who have originated from a covenant. So there is a spiritual government. There is a spiritual government that ruled the people of Israel. And in fact, for the Word of God shows us that for a very, very long time, Israel was governed by God. It is only when they reached a point and they said they wanted a king like other nations surrounding them, that they were given a human king. But before, God is the one who used to rule this nation as their king. And what God first of all did is to establish a foundation spiritual system, supernatural system that would order the nation that he was going to create from Isaac. The nation that was going to create from Isaac. And you know this, God entered this blood covenant with Abraham. It was a covenant, is an agreement between two people. And so in this covenant they agreed that God may take one of his seeds, Isaac, and develop the nation that he would want to develop. And God also spoke to him and told him what would be of that covenant, of that nation. We see that later on when Moses took the people of Israel into the wilderness, God established a profound spiritual system. God established a profound spiritual system that the people of Israel would follow, so that they do not fall into sin, so that they are not destroyed by sin, so that they do not do things that you bring sinful activities that may bring to destruction of societies or destruction of families. So all these transactions, they were supposed to carry them as a society, even as a culture, so that families are preserved, so that individuals in families are preserved, so that people in the nations are preserved, because of the supernatural complexity that comes through the raising of nations. Through the raising of nations, for example, even if it is a tribe, through the raising of a society, which is in Africa is called a tribe. They are spiritual systems which were ordered to protect the people from scattering and from destruction. And so we also see God do the same thing, establish a spiritual system so that the people of Israel, the families, are not destroyed and scattered. And God, who is the inceptor of the family, he's the one who brought forth this concept of families. And he is the one who initiated the first family of Adam and Sarai. And also we can see how he came again to Abraham to show how he can use the family, how he can work the family, how it is important that the family system is also ordered by the correct supernatural and spiritual system. And so we are saying that families exhibit very complex spiritual dynamics. And also the Word of God, because of Adam and Eve, the Word of God has taught us that spiritual crimes, they are spiritual violations, they are spiritual crimes. For example, because of the laws that God gave Adam and Eve. God gave Adam and Eve a certain law that they should not eat the fruits of the tree which was in the middle of the garden. And the minute they eat of it, they will surely die. So because they violated that law, they entered into a supernatural crime. They entered into a supernatural crime called sin. So the Bible has taught us that such spiritual crimes which violate the laws of God, they are called sins, they are called transgressions, they are called iniquities. So there are so many authorities that may follow people's lives in the form of sins, in the form of transgressions, and in form of iniquities. And although people may not fully realize about the spiritual consequences of their own activities, of their own lives, of their own interactions, of their own engagements, of their own words, of their own proclamations, of their own belief system, people may not know that there are any spiritual consequences. But in this age, we know that there are a lot of spiritual negative consequences that have followed people's lives, that have chained down families, that have really chained down families, that have chained people's potentials, that have hindered the law of God of Genesis 1 verse 28 from being easily manifested in people's lives, from many people of the world failing to get their resources and to enter into their appointment, to enter into their place. We see so many, a very great percentage of the peoples of the world with their opportunities and their lives being challenged greatly, where we really need to find the solutions for these derailments in people's lives. So we are saying that the Bible has taught us that spiritual crimes, there are spiritual crimes that are called sins, transgressions, and iniquities. And if you read the Word of God properly, that the laws of God is not only the one which is given in the Ten Commandments or the ones which are given in the Leviticus. You will realize that the Bible itself is a law in itself. There are so many instructions that people have been given in the Word of God, because God is the one who understands the spiritual matrix, the spiritual nature, the need of the spiritual personality within a person. God understands what that person requires, and a lot of it is enshrined in the Word of God. And if we follow these themes as principles, we will be able to really help our lives in a very big way. And the same source, the Word of God, which is a library of 66 books, and the Word of God is the one of the resources that talk a lot about people's supernatural nature. It also has taught us that these iniquities, transgressions, and spiritual crimes can be passed on from generation to generation. It can be passed on from generation to generation, and it can influence people in a very devastating way. And this is expressed with the family of Adam and Eve. This is where expressed with the family of Adam and Eve. And the sin of Adam and Eve, which took place in Genesis, continue to be propagated in all generations. The sin of Adam and Eve, whether people like it or not, whether people know about it or they don't know about it, the sin of Adam and Eve continue to be propagated in all peoples from generation to generation. And it continues to be compounded. Its influence and its ramifications in people's lives continue to be compounded, even as people, as society, develop their own spiritual systems. We have seen that societies, for example, in Africa, they have developed their own spiritual system. So to try and curtail some of the ramifications of the crime that came from Adam and Eve. But in essence, this sin, spiritual violation and crime of Adam and sin, and Adam and Eve continue to be compounded from generation to generation. So we see that family members in families, in the unit families and also in the large families, they are greatly influenced by supernatural dynamics. They are greatly influenced by supernatural dynamics. People have got so many problems today that even science and technology cannot solve. And even the government cannot solve those problems. And those are the problems that Jesus came to solve. And we see that when Jesus was speaking to the people, they were surrounded by people with so many problems. And he was able, without difficulties, to address these problems and set people free from these problems. Because people are followed by supernatural dynamics that affect them from generation to generation. For example, we see like the family of Abraham and Sarai was followed by the lying streak. You know, the family of Abraham and Sarai had a character of lying. Abraham lied. Isaac lied about his wife. And even Jacob lied greatly. He lied greatly. And he continued to lie. And even Rachel lied to Jacob about the gods that he was carrying. We also see barrenness in the family, in this family of Abraham, because we see that Abraham and Sarai married from the same family. And also these children of Jacob, the children of Abraham, Jacob and Isaac, they married from the same family from where Abraham had come from. And also the ladies were also followed by barrenness. There was a problem of barrenness that followed the family, the women, and they followed this family from generation to generation. And today we see that families, even in Christian families, today in modern society, in Africa, and I know all over the world, that families are faced with these compounding supernatural challenges. Families are all over the world. And especially in third world nations, because of the element of poverty, lack of resources, lack of finances, we find that families are greatly being compounded. These supernatural problems and supernatural challenges are really compounding people's lives greatly. They are compounding the lives of the young generation, of the people who are the generation, the springing of nations, the springing of nations that springs from the new generations. We found that these generations are also being affected greatly by these supernatural systems. Jesus, we know that God provided a solution. God knows very, very clearly of this problem that follows people from generation to generation and continue to sit and compound on people's lives and people's expression of our potential and people's ability to use the resources that are available for them. But God has provided, that's why God provided Jesus. Jesus to become the superior blood transaction, to become the Holy Lamb. He provided Jesus to become the Holy Lamb of the superior blood transaction on the cross. And Jesus became the Holy Lamb of the blood sacrifice, of the holy blood sacrifice, who was slain and yet lives. Who was slain and yet lives. Jesus was provided to the families. Jesus was provided as the holy lamb of the blood sacrifice that was needed to be given. A special blood sacrifice was needed to be given out for all the peoples of the world. We know that the people of Israel, in their spiritual government that God gave them, there was the bull of atonement that was given each year for the forgiveness of sins of all people. But that was not enough. It had to be done every year. And also many of the spiritual systems that people have drawn for themselves, where they use the blood of animals and birds, it is still not enough, because it has to be done consistently to facilitate and help people's lives. But the Holy Lamb, Jesus became the Holy Lamb of the sacrifice. And this sacrifice of Jesus as a person, where he became the Holy Lamb, is sufficient. It is sufficient for all times, for the redemption and the forgiveness of sins. It was provided for the people of the world. God gave out Jesus to become the Holy Lamb of the sacrifice, because this is what was needed to bring correction between the God and the peoples of the world, because of the spiritual crime that was brought about by Adam and Eve, which really affected the bloodlines of people. And God provided Jesus as the Holy Lamb of the blood sacrifice, the Holy Lamb of the blood sacrifice, who was slain but yet lives, who was slain but yet lives. Today is Jesus, that holy sacrifice. It speaks today. It is alive today. And it is waiting for everybody who wants to be redeemed by the power of this blood transaction of Jesus Christ on the cross, which also sealed the legal authority of the new blood covenant. The legal authority of the new blood covenant, as is written in the books of Luke and Mark. So the Holy Lamb of the blood sacrifice that was given through the life of Jesus Christ provides a system to heal families. And this is what God told Abraham, that his seed will bless the families of the world. In Genesis, he told them that his seed will bless the families of the world.